All right, well, welcome to my session, Interpersonal Alchemy. My name is Mark Cruth. I am a team doctor here at Atlassian. You might be like, what's that, and why are you wearing this? Well, come up to me afterwards. I'll tell you more about it. But needless to say, I work with teams to understand how they work and help them find better ways of working. And one of the things I tend to do on the side, when I'm not a doctor, I tend to find myself being more of a, I dropped my thing. I find myself being more of an alchemist, I find, so you gotta get the whole setup for that, You can't just say you're an alchemist. You gotta be an alchemist. So for me, I like to experiment. I like to go in and try to find clever ways of working with teams. And why not do it with things like alchemy? So today we're gonna go through a conversation in a book I found. And I found this book when I was exploring through the hotel, trying to find my room. About 2 days after getting here, I finally found my room. I know, right? But during that journey, I found myself into the catacombs of the Venetia. Who would have thought that was there? But in that, I found this book. It's called Interpersonal Alchemy. And I said, this is kind of cool. And so I want to share it with you, along with some of the things I've kind of found through it along the way. So let's take a look. Let's open it up. Let's see what's there. Well, the first thing we found in this book, you know it, it's alchemy, it's an experiment. So I like to kick these things off with a little bit of an experiment. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take 5 minutes, and what we're gonna do is, in order to really unleash the potential of a team, we need to have high trust. And hey, we're a team here, we're all gathered together. And so we need to get to know each other more deeply. So what I want you to do is you're gonna pair up with somebody, and you're gonna talk about a couple things that you may not have mentioned to others. First thing, you're going to answer the question, what's something you're interested in that maybe most people haven't heard of? You're also going to say, hey, what's your favorite book or movie? Why did that speak to you so much? If you could live at any time in history, when would that be? And I think the most important question of all here, how long would you survive a zombie apocalypse? So it's going to determine who's friends here at the end of this. So what I'm going to do, find your partner, and I'm going to put 5 minutes on the clock. I want you each to rotate through these questions. I'm going to give it about halfway mark, so that way you make sure you switch. So your 5 minutes starts now. Find that partner, start learning about them. All right, let's bring it back in, everyone. Let's bring it back in. All right, I hope you all learned some really fascinating things out there about some people that you probably have never met. Many of you probably just met someone for the first time, and guess what? That person now knows probably some stuff that many others around you probably don't know. You've learned, I hope you went through this, and I hope you found someone that maybe, you found someone that's more of a kindred spirit. You're like, oh wow, you're interested in that too? Or maybe you'd say something to someone you normally wouldn't. Or you've ultimately found out who you're gonna take with you to the zombie apocalypse and who you're not. And I will say, anyone here that said it would be more than a day, I'd like to see you afterwards, okay? We're gonna form a group. But this is what alchemy is about. And what do I mean by that? Alchemy is this construct of taking something and transforming it into something amazing. Taking something dull, something, unvaluable, things like lead, and turning that into something precious like gold. And for us, that aspect, when we think about it, can transcend to a new level. And this book here we're reviewing today talks about that next level of alchemy. And it's that aspect of interpersonal alchemy, that higher form. And what do we mean by that? Turning groups of individuals into high-performing teams. Who here believes that at some point in your career, you've worked with what you consider a high-performing team? Show of hands. Remember how that felt? I remember. I'd probably say I've had one, maybe two high-performing teams I've worked with. And just the energy you get. Talk about your battery being full at the end of that day. Our goal here with interpersonal alchemy is to turn people that are work acquaintance into this powerhouse of a team by unleashing that potential. Now, how are we going to do that today? Well, according to our book, we're going to do it in two forms. First, we're going to seek some knowledge. We're going to go try to understand, what does it mean to be a high-performing team? Let's see some examples out there of what high performance might look like. And then we're going to experiment relentlessly. Now, we won't necessarily do it a lot here, but I'm going to give you some experiments. So that was one we just did. Great opportunity to unleash some potential. We're going to do one more before we're done here today. We're going to talk about how you then exercise that. Now, the scientist in me really wants a rigorous process around this, right? We can't just be flimsy about this. So what does that mean? Well, Y'all remember that scientific method? Remember back in middle school when your science professor made you go dissect that frog and go through the scientific method? And I will say I apologize if you had repressed that memory and now it's flooding back to you and you're like, oh God, I remember that. Well, we ought to use that scientific method here because it's a proven process. This is not something that's just new. It's been around for a long time. I come from a research background and we use this all the time. And so if you're not familiar, if you don't remember this, let's walk through a little bit because this will kind of guide us on our path. First step, we're going to ask some questions. Hey, what's a high-performing team? What are the attributes? We're going to ask ourselves some questions because without a good question, we can't come up with a good answer. From there, we actually have to do, wait for it. Wait for it. Maybe not. Well, you have to build a hypothesis. You have to do some research. So when you go and do that research, you got to go find out. It's like, cool, we have some questions. Let's go gather data. As you gather that data, you can then construct that hypothesis statement. You can go in and say, all right, based on what we know today, this is what we believe is going to happen. And then from there, we can experiment. And from that aspect, we can then analyze our data and ultimately communicate those results. It's a rigorous process. So we're going to go through that today. So now that we know the 6 steps, let's actually start this out. And the first part we're going to go through, there it is. Ask a question. Step 1. What questions do we have now around this? So as we think about this, we really are asking, so, what creates a high-performing team? And really, it's hard to say. Sometimes we might say, well, is it putting all your best people together in a group and saying, hey, you all are awesome. If you come together, you make super awesome. Maybe. Is it giving them an unlimited budget? Is it going through and saying, giving you a challenging project? All of these things could lead to this, but really, what's the question we're trying to answer? And for me, I kind of looked back at that and I said, the question I really want to answer here is, why do some teams perform better than others? Ultimately, high performance is an attribute, but if I can figure out how one team can perform better than others, all of a sudden I can start building high-performing teams. So that's kind of what led me into that question space. And again, this question now gives us the ability now to think about some next steps. It now says, hey, if we're going to be looking at why do some teams perform better than others, we can do a little research. We can go out there and collect some data. So let's do that. Conducting research. So in order to formulate that hypothesis that we're going to head into, we need to actually understand what some high-performing teams look like. Got to do a little field research. What makes that good team, that great team tick? And from there, we're going to actually look at a couple examples. So many of us here, we're at a software conference. Many of us here are familiar with software teams. We've seen those attributes. I actually want to pick out a couple of different teams that aren't necessarily software teams, but great examples. So again, we can look to distill some of these elements from there. We want us to take a look at some of those highest performing teams outside of software and see what we can learn from them. So let's dive in. We've got 3 examples we're going to walk through. First one is a no-brainer that you've seen tons of books out there about this. The U.S. Army, the Navy SEALs. These are high-performing teams under high intense pressure. From books like Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal that we learn about things such as high-performing teams focus on extreme transparency and empowered execution, meaning that we all have to know what's going on and that we're given the ability to do that. This leads to decentralized decision-making, which is hugely valuable for them. Trust and purpose are paramount in these teams. Now you look at groups like the Navy SEALs, and another good book to reference here would be Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, a decorated Navy SEAL, who talks about the fact that things like, a strong resolution around team mission is critical for a high-performing team. We all have to be bought in. If one of us is only somewhat bought in, it jeopardizes the whole team. Also, they begin to talk about making decisions with incomplete information. Because guess what? We're never going to have enough data as a team. So for us, as we look to extract those elements out, some of the things we're going to be looking at are things such as extreme transparency, creating that shared consciousness. Things such as decentralized decision-making, making empowered execution. Resolute belief in team mission being a huge element, and as well as things like making decisions with incomplete information. I think these are the core things we want to pull out from teams like these. So we got our first data point. Let's move on. We're going to take a look at another team that we're all probably kind of familiar with in the software world. Let's talk about sports teams, and particularly, we're talking about rugby teams. We're familiar with Scrum. We know the analogy that comes out of that. Well, one of the teams out there we probably all heard of is going to be the rugby team known as the All Blacks of New Zealand. They're famous for that impressive ceremonial haka at the beginning of their games. The thing is, too, is they're also an incredibly high-performing team. I think the stats put them at the best international rugby team in the last 100 years. So for a team like this, there's got to be elements that help them perform. Well, for them, they look at it as actually mantras, beliefs within their system. For them, they have mantras such as play with purpose, or don't be a dickhead. Swear to God, it's in their locker room. But the thing is these are kind of amusing, but they really translate into some purposeful aspects. They translate into things like trust people to rise to the challenge. So again, we're going to say, hey, you're here. We're going to believe in you. They say, hey, no one person is bigger than the organization or team. Leave that ego at the door. And that we really need to have the right skills and know how to apply them to be successful. It's not enough to say, hey, anybody can come join our team. You got to be able to perform in the skills we're looking at, and then it's the team element that helps elevate that. So really interesting elements that are coming out of there. Now, for our last example I want to talk about, this one's a little bit more unconventional. If you've listened to the Atlassian Team of Stream podcast or read our work-life blog, you've probably heard about this team. And it is the team behind the Ford Focus. So remember this car back in the day? Actually, at this point, it's 40 years ago. It's hard to believe. But the Ford Focus came out in the 80s, and it was deemed the lifeblood, the savior of Ford. So let's rewind back a few more years from this. Back in the mid-'70s, Ford was struggling. They were having issues, to say the least. At the time, the name Ford, if you remember the acronym, found on road, dead. That was the acronym people used because you know what? It wasn't far from the truth back then. There's a lot of issues with quality. There was a lot of issues with the build. And it had to do with the fact that each group had their own silo in the organization. You had manufacturing, you had engineering, you had marketing, you had finance. No one talked to each other. And you had competitors like Toyota running laps around them with their new sleek designs, their cross-functional, interconnected groups that were helping to build products. And so for Ford, they said, we've got to change or we're going to die. And so they said, we're going to do a Hail Mary. We got this new car we're investing in, the Ford Taurus. Oh, actually, I should say Ford Taurus on there. I just realized. Whoops. But basically what they ended up doing is they said, hey, you know what? We've got to learn from the mistakes in the past. We've got to bring teams together. Let's actually create a cross-functional team. Manufacturing, engineering, finance. Let's bring them together and help them kind of let them figure out where we're going to go. They focused on aspects such as directed autonomy, they called it. It's that aspect of, hey, we're going to tell you where we want to go, and then you're in charge. You're in the driver's seat, per se. Go take us there. And one of the most powerful things that we found there, and you've probably all seen it from your world in software, is when deadlines hit, they had the psychological safety to say, hey, we're not ready. And so when things like auto shows passed, they said, hey, are we ready yet? And the team says no. They said, okay, we trust you. We're not going to berate you. We're not going to make you, we're not going to make you feel like you're pressured into it. They had that psychological safety to push back. And what ended up happening? It ended up being a huge success for them. It ended up revitalizing Ford and thinking about how they do things different. And so again, as you think about that, those elements we're extracting out of there are things like that cross-functional teams versus those siloed departments. They created directed autonomy by giving guidance. And then ultimately, in the end, psychological safety was critical for them to avoid those mistakes of the past. Now, for us here, as we're thinking about this, these kind of three examples allowed me to start saying, hey, what are the core alchemical elements then of high-performing teams? What are the things that, for us, we want to take away from this? Well, what I did is I said, well, let's sketch in our notebook. We said, I think we have things such as purpose creates autonomy. This aspect that if I know what I'm doing, I can now be empowered to do that. I have decentralized decision-making, fueling empowerment. If I have the ability to make my own decisions, I now have the ability to feel that I can actually go where I need to go. I don't feel like I'm being constrained. High trust and psychological safety accelerates team cohesion. This aspect that, hey, with trust, meaning I trust that you're going to do the right thing, and psychological safety, meaning I feel that I'm safe to bring up issues in this group, we all of a sudden bond as a team. And then finally, we have this element of embracing uncertainty sustains growth. If we know we're not going to be perfect, guess what? We can keep moving forward. We can keep progressing. So these are those 4 alchemical elements. Now, as a scientist, I'll say that there's no good experiment done without peer review. So is there anything out there that helps us validate that these are impactful things? So I did a little research, and there is some out there. Let's start out with a company we're very familiar with, and that's going to be our friends at Google. So if you remember back in 2012, there was a project called Project Aristotle. It was all about, hey, what makes a high-performing team? And from that, they found a couple of core elements that made good high-performing teams. It's psychological safety and dependability. That goes right there with our high trust and psychological safety, accelerating team cohesion. Things like structure and clarity, meaning and impact, those all tie into that purpose creating autonomy. So for us already, you can start seeing, hey, we're seeing some patterns out there. That's perfect. Now, what about the company that actually creates teams, right? Wink, wink. Atlassian did a state of teams last year. You may have seen this out there. We said, hey, we went out, we talked to a bunch of teams, and we said, hey, what is helping you? What's hurting you? And there were a couple of key findings that essentially says what drives good, healthy teams. Those things include things like a shared understanding. Kind of leans right into that purpose and autonomy. Adaptive planning and practice and adjusting to that plan. That goes back into embracing uncertainty. And ultimately, a culture that celebrates achievement, regular opportunities to reflect, and timely constructive feedback. Feeds right into that psychological safety and trust. These are all core elements that we see as being impactful to that. So for me, I think that it's all lined up. I feel pretty good about that. So I think we can move into our next steps. Let's go to our hypothesis now. So if we've done our research, we collect our data, we can now do our hypothesis. So as we're thinking about our hypothesis, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to start saying, well, how do we construct one? So being in software, I imagine many of you have heard of this term hypothesis. You know, hey, we're going to write a hypothesis statement for our epic or our feature or what have you. As we know, hypothesis has been around for a long time, part of that research method. And so for us, we have some core elements that we think make up a good hypothesis. Things like a good hypothesis is a statement. It's not a question. We're being definitive. We're saying this is true. That's what we're going to test. It's empirically testable and falsifiable, meaning that we can test it and we can also prove it wrong. If we can test it and we can't prove it wrong, it's not a good hypothesis. It's specific and precise, and it's plausible in nature, meaning if I drink some water, I'll be able to run the minute mile or something like that. I don't think that's going to be possible in my shape right now. So for us, these have to be true about a hypothesis. And so for us, what we're going to use a simple structure, which is we believe something, and that's going to result in something. So let's take a look. This is the hypothesis we scribbled in our notebook. So we said we believe that embedding practices in the teams that clarify purpose, decentralize decision-making, build psychological safety and trust, and normalizes uncertainty will result in teams' full potential being unleashed. Goes back to that aspect of that first question. What makes one team perform better than another? Well, we've got to unleash that potential, and it's through these elements. So huzzah, we've got it. We've got our hypothesis. We can actually go start testing something now. Fantastic. And so for us, let's talk a little bit about that. So it's time to experiment. Now, in order to experiment, we need some different tools to do that job, right? We need to go out there and actually try some things. And there's some things that we can use to prove and disprove. And so today what I want to do is I'm going to cover with you 5 that I've used in the past that I find are super valuable for helping to unleash some of those elements that we extracted out. We've got, as we walk through these, one thing to note, the deck's going to be available afterwards. Top right-hand corner, there's going to be an alchemical symbol. If you click on that, it'll take you to more information about that exercise if you want to dive in deeper. So let's get into this. As we think about things like that purpose statement, remember, as being one of our elements, one thing I love to do is creating a team vision. Now, this is actually, the information on this can be found in many places, but I like the one that Rework does from Google. They do a really good job at simplifying this and providing you some great templates. Really, it goes back to this idea that identifying things like values, purpose, mission, strategy, goals, they really help bring a team together. Now, teams tend to think they know what they're doing. They know what's going on. But I'll be tell you as a former coach, as a team doctor now, it's more often not the case. Teams think they know, but then they find out that it's a little bit like this. And then team vision statements really can be as complex or as simple as possible. If a team wants a statement and that's something they can rally around, awesome. They need a whole Confluence page with all this information, awesome. It's not about the simplicity of it, it's about the understanding of it. If the team understands it, that's what matters. Now for us, why do we do this? It unites teams together around a common understanding of who they are, what they do. And so if you go to a site like Rework Site, you can actually download a template here that will actually walk you through step by step how to do this exercise. So pretty cool exercise to go through. Takes about an hour, and it's amazing the insights you get from that. So let's go on. We're going to take a look at another one. So the next activity I have on this list is going to be delegation poker. So one of the things I've done in my past lives is this idea of working as a Management 3.0 facilitator. Management 3.0 is a movement that was out there. It's still out there in the last decade or so, but it's all about kind of revitalizing how we work. And they've done a really good job at making some great tools around how we work. And one of these is delegation poker. So delegation poker is a great way to spell out who makes what types of decisions in your team. It's amazing how many teams are paralyzed by decision making. So why not make it fun? Why not make it interactive and make it something that we can actually come to a decision on? And so what we do here is we actually set out these cards, and these are little cards that you would print out. You can have them online too. And what you would end up doing is you would go through and you would say, here are all the decisions we've got to make. And everyone gets a card, and they say, all right, let's lay out where do you feel you land in this decision process? And if you say, hey, I'm more of a teller, that means I get to make the decision. Versus someone who says, well, I'm a inquirer. I'm curious about what happens, but I don't need to make the decision. All of a sudden, we've got clarity. And guess what? If 6 people on your team say they're tellers, oh, hey, maybe we need to actually all agree that we're all going to agree on this instead. We have to come to consensus. So it's things that help accelerate those things. And again, what I like most about this exercise, it avoids that need for management to make decisions, as decision ownership is now part of all parties' practices here. It's like we basically said, instead of saying, oh, we got to go talk to the boss, the team is now empowered because they know how they make decisions. So another great tool out there. Now, as we think about this too, another one that I like to go to, and as an Atlassian team doctor I'm a big fan of, I'll be honest, is this aspect of a team health monitor. So Atlassian put out these team health monitors a few years ago, and they're designed as they're not a retrospective. They're a way for us to check the temperature, understand, hey, how is this team performing right now? Like, are they healthy? Are there good things that they're doing? Do they feel like there's maybe a lack of cohesion? And so what they allow us to do is really take that honest look at how they're doing. They really should be conducted too on a regular basis. The idea is it's not a one-time check. It's something that we go in and maybe spend an hour with the team, check and say, hey, how are things going? And then say, hey, we're going to do some things afterwards. And then we're going to come back in a few months and we'll say, hey, how's the temperature now? Our goal is to, again, we're not about getting green on this. We're not about being successful on it. We're about checking our health and being conscious of it. Again, it identifies your team's strengths that can be leveraged and the weaknesses that you can work on too. And again, if you go online, you can find this on the Team Playbook website, which is a great resource there. We've also got some, if you come talk with me after, we've got some great tools that you can leverage with this as well. All right, we've got 2 more to go. The next one I have is another one from our Team Playbook, which I'm a big fan of, and it's this idea of a ritual reset. Who here has meetings on their calendar that they don't want to go to? Right? We all do it. I see someone waving their hand like, yes, please, God. So when we think about ritual resets, what the idea is as a team, we should actually sit back and actually take a look at hey, what are we doing as a team? How do we work? What are the rituals or ceremonies we do? Because a lot of times we find that we're doing something because we've always done it. So how can we go in and improve that? Well, let's actually do an inventory of that. Let's go through, and once we've done that inventory, actually find out which ones we're going to improve, which ones we're going to remove, which ones we're going to keep because we think they're pretty valuable. It's just a great way to reflect on where things are at because a lot of times, again, we don't ask that question. So ask the question. It's amazing what comes out of that. Now, the last one we have is always a fun one. Who likes some improv, right? Who likes some improv? Improv's a great way, and you saw a little bit of it, and even just how you've been talking with people. It's that ability to open up and express yourself really authentically. And this is something that you can do in a room, you can do in Zoom, you can do it all over the place. And it really starts with a prompt, but no one session is going to look the same. And it's all built on this concept of building on each other, this whole yes and element here. And what I really like about this is improv enhances our team's creativity, our empathy, our ability to adapt to unpredictable situations. By understanding and improving, all of a sudden we know how to work with each other in ways that maybe we didn't in the past. So now, as an alchemist, I can be considered just a little bit mad, I think. That's alchemy a little bit. And so I kind of want to unleash a little bit of that madness. And you know what we're going to do right now? Let's do a little improv, right? We all like a little improv. So we're going to do another experiment. So what we're going to do is you're going to partner with somebody. I encourage you to find someone new. If you can't, no worries, but find someone new. And we're going to run through an activity for 5 minutes. I want you to stretch that improv muscle. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be focusing on this element of active listening and unexpected information, because that goes back to that breeding uncertainty. How do we leverage that? So what you're going to do is we're going to do a couple things. First, the first person's going to start a sentence. Hi, my name is Mark, and I've had a great time at this conference. It's been amazing. The second person's going to say, okay, I've got to start. Oh, the second person's going to continue that conversation, but they've got to start with the last word. So the last word is amazing. Amazing stuff has really happened here. I really love everything we've done. And then step 3 is repeat. Person 1 being like, done. Done has been a feeling I've had about really all the stuff we've been doing back at work. I'm really just done with it. I want to change. You can see that pattern. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you 5 minutes. You're going to get into your pairs, and you're going to start building on that. Okay? Active listening. Do that improv. Your time starts in 3, 2, 1. So what I love to see here is the conversation just going. You start having fun with this. You start, again, being that authentic self, which, again, it's part of that aspect of improv. You can't put on a mask for improv. You have to be yourself, and that's part of what, again, builds authenticity in that team. It builds that trust. So from the exercises we've covered to the different experiments to the improv we've done, hopefully you've got some great activities that you can do now with your teams. Maybe try unleashing some of that potential. So now, if you're looking for more, one thing I will say is there's some great resources out there. First and foremost, the team playbook. There's dozens of different activities you can do out there to go see anything from, hey, my team is struggling with decision making, to, hey, I need a creative retrospective, or how do I build purpose around my team? Great things come from there. Management 3.0, another open source place to find some great practices and tools. I find those incredibly creative. They're fun, and so you can find, depending on what you're looking for, that could be a good resource. And then last but not least is Rework. Google has some great material out there in terms of, hey, how do you approach different problems? So again, all 3 of these are great resources to go and figure out how do you experiment with your teams. All right, so I think we've got our experiments down. And that means we can move into 5 and 6, right? Well, analyzing data and communicate the results, I don't think we really can just yet. I mean, hell, we haven't even done step 4 yet. We haven't actually experimented with our teams. Because without an experiment, we have no data. And so in our book, the pages are just going to be blank. There's no data to analyze. There's no results to communicate. And so for us, that's kind of coming into where I'm going to kind of start ending with my call to action to y'all. Coming out of today, I hope you had a little fun. You hopefully got to learn a couple new things. But what I'm going to ask you to do is go out there and experiment. Go out there when you go back to to work on Monday. Try something. Maybe do a little improv. Maybe do that last word, first word that we just did. That little thing. Say, hey, we're going to start our scrum today, or whatever meeting we're doing today with that. Do that experimentation. Try something new. Analyze that data. Look at it and say, all right, I'm going to intentionally try to find ways to improve my team. Did it work? Did we perform a little bit better based on what we're looking at? And then ultimately, I always love folks to go out there and share. Share the information out there. Twitter, LinkedIn, put hashtag Interpersonal Alchemy. Share it out there. Say, hey, I did this experiment, and guess what? It failed, or it was awesome. Tell us what it is, because that's the beauty of experimentation. It's not about failure or success. It's about trying something new. Now, for me, my ultimate hero here is Doc. And I said, before coming in today, I was like, you know what, we should do some experimentation. And I actually had the opportunity to distill some of those elements that we talked through, some of that purpose, some of that, decentralized decision making. And I said, you know what, I wonder if I could create a serum that could help me with that high performance. Let's actually see this. All right, stand back. Oh, I'm seeing some gold. Uh-oh. I'm feeling a little empowered right now. So hey, look at that. We've got a little liquid gold on our hands. So all kidding aside, I hope this was fun. And one thing I'll leave you with is I found this business card on the floor earlier, and it's for these doctors I've been told about. I don't know who these guys are. I think they're working around in white coats, maybe some scrubs. But one of the things I'm doing as part of Atlassian is I'm working with our chief of medicine, Don Price. You probably all know him. And we're looking at ways to help improve teams. We're looking for organizations to partner with to help them as they're looking at saying, hey, we've got some great tools, but maybe we're lacking the practices to use those. So as doctors, our goal is to go out there and help customers with that. So if you're looking for a doctor, if you need help, if there's things getting in your way, you want to unleash that potential, please reach out. Teamplaybook@Atlassian.com. We're looking for customers to potentially help unleash some new potential with. So with that said, I think it's time to close the book on this thing. Just got a few minutes left. I want to thank you all for experimenting with me, for being here and trying this all out. And one thing is, as you look to unleash that potential of your teams, remember to unleash that inner alchemist in the process too. So, that said, thank you all. I appreciate you. And we will open it up. We got about 5 minutes for questions. So if anyone has any questions, we got Jamie with a mic, happy to answer.
Anybody have a question? Questions? Alchemy questions? You want to practice chemistry, team chemistry?
But that's all right.
Don't be shy. It's your chance. We got a doctor in the house.
Oh, we've got a question over here. Oh, yes, very much so. A little bit of trying to embody some of it. Any other questions out there? Again, if you're happy, come definitely see me. Again, I'll bring up that slide here. If you're interested in a doctor, let us know. We're happy to help you.